Alright my friends, who's excited for a tactics video? I hope you are. I know I am. We're going to talk today about one of my favorite mechs. It's been a while since I did one of these videos about how to conduct tactics for one of my favorite battle mech designs. And today I have chosen the Stalker, which is definitely a personal favorite. So to start with, let's lay it out. What are the characteristics of a Stalker? Especially, what are the characteristics of a Stalker that are relevant to tactics? So let's just take a look at the original STK-3F. So what's characteristic of the Stalker? I mean, you think of a Thunderbolt, right? And just take the Thunderbolt and double the weapons, right? Just multiply all the weapons on board by 2 and slow it down by 1 hex. In a nutshell, that is the core design concept of a Stalker. So as you might expect, a Stalker's role is really closely related to a Thunderbolt's role. Well, what's a Thunderbolt good for? It's good for getting in the enemy's face. It's a brawler. You send it up the middle of the map, or up towards where you expect your enemy to concentrate their forces, and you get it into close combat. So you're hoping to pose a close combat threat to enemy mechs, to pose a significant enough threat that they will direct fire at the heavy armor on this brawler mech. So think of the Stalker as like a super brawler, and one that needs to stay on the move until it starts to get into close quarters with enemy mechs, because with that 3-5 movement, it's going to take you a little while to get up into your really effective zone where you are 6 hexes or ideally 3 hexes away from enemy forces. Fortunately, the Stalker has some long-range weapons as well, usually about 20 LRMs on board, and it's usually got some large lasers, and in later versions, those can turn into extended range large lasers. So you can shoot on your way in, fire off plenty of shots on your way in, which of course is very advantageous for a brawler mech. The Stalker does everything in terms of offensive power except for armor piercing. It doesn't have any big damage chunks larger than its 8-point large lasers on most of the versions of the Stalker. So for most versions of the Stalker, you are going to want to combine them with a mech, ideally a long-range mech that fires some kind of heavy armor piercing shots. PPCs, Gauss rifles in later eras. Those are you want a mech to kind of have the Stalker's back and to punch some holes in enemy units so that the Stalker can exploit those with its medium lasers and its SRMs. Now, because the mech is not very mobile, that actually makes movement really key, because you only have so much opportunity over the course of a typical game to get a Stalker where you want it to go. The location that you started out, where you deploy it on the map, is going to make a big difference to the way that Stalker performs in the course of the game. The map you see here is really not an ideal map for a Stalker, so I chose it to show you a situation where you're going to have to make some compromises with your Stalker, because the center of the map that you see in this map is really built up with a lot of terrain that's going to slow the Stalker down, get between it and its targets, and keep it from getting right up close to enemy line mechs as quickly as it can. So where would you want to place a Stalker on this map? Think about it for a second. You're going to want your Stalker to advance as quickly as it can on the enemy so that it can get to a location where it can do short-range fire as quickly as possible. On this map, I would actually do something differently with a Stalker than I usually would like to, ideally, and put it on a flank, because the flanks on this map have the most clear, straight trajectories for the Stalker to follow in the general direction of the enemy, right? So I'd put it on the right side because at least it can run up that right side, and then there's a lot of clear area that it could potentially get into line of sight of enemy units with, assuming of course that the enemy kind of deploys a little bit evenly across their side. If they had deployed concentrated on the left side, then of course I would want to put the Stalker on that left flank to start with. Generally, if you are taking a Stalker, you want it to be one of the last mechs that you lay down on the map during deployment, because you want to place it in a situation where it has the straightest and most direct path towards the center of the enemy force, where most of their stuff is concentrated. So save your Stalker to deploy it last and place it in a situation where it's going to have the most direct, quickest path towards enemy units that you might like to destroy with it. This map here, on the other hand, is really kind of the ideal of what you want to have with a Stalker if you're bringing a Stalker into combat. It doesn't have a whole lot of terrain in the middle or on the way to the middle of the map. You know, at least you can get around the terrain that is there. You can see there's a kind of a central, fairly straight path towards the middle of the map. And most of the terrain that's there around the middle of the map is woods. You know, and woods is the least kind of problematic terrain for a Stalker to be in. If a Stalker is going to be in built-up terrain, you want it to be in woods, because the woods is slowing you down, but it's also providing you with some defense. A lot of your defense, believe it or not, over a big portion of the game with the Stalker is going to come from running, because if you run those 5 hexes, you're going to get a +2 target movement modifier, which is not so bad. This is another reason why you want a really clear line, because the Stalker can't afford to spend any movement points on turning or dealing with rough terrain if it's going to get up to that full +2 movement modifier. This means that the kind of terrain that a Stalker doesn't like is terrain like elevation changes, a lot of up and down hills, or rough terrain, which doesn't give you any defensive bonus and just slows you down, or water, which slows you down a lot. So you want to stay away from those kinds of terrain. You should try not to be tempted to move your Stalker into those terrains unless it's a situation where you really stand to gain something significant by putting your Stalker in that rough terrain or on that hill. Generally speaking, the Stalker, a lot of assault mechs are mechs that you want to put up on hills. The Stalker is not a mech that you want to put on a hill in most situations. So on this map, I would want to deploy the Stalker in kind of the centermost straight path that it can get. It'll be slowed down for the first turn by getting down off of that hill, but it will make it a full 4 hexes the first turn, and then after the first turn, it'll be moving at a 5 hex clip each turn until it gets to that center. So here you see, this is the kind of a situation, this is where I want my Stalker to end up. I have the option to move into these woods if I want that extra protection. I have the option to potentially walk right up to my enemy's brawler mech and kick it. The kicks from a Stalker can be devastating. You know, I have a lot of options here for how to engage, in this case, this enemy Thunderbolt at close range, right? Of course, I'm also moving to flank, as you can see with a couple of other mechs that I have. It's very nice to have a supporting mech with a Stalker, something that moves a little bit, you know, considerably perhaps faster than it, like this Wolfhound that I've got on the right side of the Stalker. That can be really useful. But honestly, in a lot of stand-up fights against a lot of enemy brawler mechs, you know, a Stalker can just win one-on-one, right? A Stalker versus a Thunderbolt, 9 times out of 10, the Stalker is going to just overpower the Thunderbolt. Of course, anytime you can bring in other mechs to support your brawler, that's good. But the nice thing about the Stalker is that sometimes it doesn't even need support. If you can, make sure that you advance with your Stalker in the direction of the target that your long-range armor-piercing mech has chosen. So if you have an Awesome that is the Stalker's backup mech, a Stalker and an Awesome is an incredible combination of assault mechs. If you have an Awesome and you're focusing the Awesome's fire on an enemy Warhammer, let's say, send that Stalker marching in the direction of that Warhammer, because by the time the Stalker gets there, its medium lasers and SRMs are likely to have some juicy internal structure targets, and they might be able to very quickly dispose of that enemy mech. And ideally, you want to pose a threat to your opponent's fire support mechs too. So if you can send the Stalker at an enemy front line mech that has an enemy fire support mech pretty close behind it, again, that's a pretty ideal strategy. If the Stalker is moving in the general direction of an enemy fire support mech that's going to be pretty vulnerable to the Stalker if it does get in short range. They're not going to be able to ignore that Stalker. They're not going to be able to back away with their front line mech and try to avoid the Stalker. They'll need to put that front line mech in between the Stalker and the rear line mech. As a general rule, you don't need to give the Stalker a veteran pilot. It's got so many weapons, and it's not going to be jumping or anything like that. Obviously, it doesn't have jump jets. A lot of the time, it's going to be firing at close range with a pretty clear path to its targets, hopefully even maybe right up next to the enemy mechs. So keeping it at gunnery skill 4 is just fine. But I would always, if I can, want to level up my Stalker pilot to piloting skill 4, because Stalkers, they're going to take a lot of hits over the course of the game. If they fall down, that can be a real problem. So keeping your Stalker on its feet is a very good thing, and I would definitely urge you to tend towards a piloting skill 4 mech warrior. Now let me end the video by drawing your attention to one of my favorite Stalkers, and this is the Tech Readout 3050 STK-5M Stalker. This mech is not without some problems in a sense. In particular, it loads too much ammo on board, and it doesn't have case. But honestly, to me that's fine, because that unprotected ammo, it's reducing the battle value of this mech. And you can just dump the ammo. Take this mech, dump the ammo first turn. I mean, not all of it, obviously. I would say you want to dump 2 tons of the LRM ammo, 1 ton from each arm, and you want to dump a ton of those narc pods that are stored in that left leg. And once you've done that, the mech's going to be really resilient. Dumping the ammo is slowing it down a little bit, so that's a bit of a problem, but you end up with a mech that is really solid. And you don't need to do this, but the fact that it has a narc beacon on board, it means that you can combo this mech with LRM support units like LRM tanks, if you wanted to bring an LRM carrier, or if you just wanted to bring something like an archer or a salamander to provide LRM fire. Well, you don't want to count on the narc getting stuck on an enemy mech, but if it does get stuck on an enemy mech, then you've got a really nice situation, because you having a bunch of LRMs, your enemy having a mech in front that has a narc beacon attached to it, you're going to be doing a significant amount of extra damage to that mech, and you might be able to get in some indirect fire against it in a situation where you otherwise wouldn't be able to. The 5M is only 100 BV points more expensive than the original 3F Stalker. It's got an extra ton of armor on board. It's got way better heat sinks. I just think this is a really high performance mech that doesn't get enough attention from players sometimes. So if you are a Stalker player, if you love the Stalker, if you hate the Stalker, if you hate fighting against the Stalker, let me know. Tell me your Stalker stories. I would love to hear them.